It began with a problem America had never faced before. In 1941, the United States was still a nation at peace. Its military was strong, but its intelligence service was weak, scattered across departments, divided by rivalry, and blinded by bureaucracy. While Japan, Germany, and Britain ran vast spy networks across the globe, America had almost nothing. Then came Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. A single morning changed everything. The United States was now at war against enemies who'd been preparing for years, using espionage, sabotage, and deception as weapons. The Japanese had infiltrated Asia with spies disguised as diplomats. The Germans ran the Abwehr and the Sicherheitsdienst, disciplined, ruthless, and everywhere. Even Britain had its own elite intelligence force, the Special Operations Executive, the SOE, already training agents to blow up bridges in occupied Europe. America had no equivalent. Within weeks of Pearl Harbor, President Franklin Roosevelt turned to a man who had been warning about this very gap. A decorated World War I hero named William J. Donovan. Donovan was not a conventional soldier. He had been wounded and decorated for bravery in the trenches of France, earning the nickname Wild Bill. But beneath his calm voice and polished manners, he had a daring streak, a belief that wars could not be won by force alone, but by information, imagination, and courage. In 1941, Roosevelt gave him a task that would define modern American intelligence. He was told to create, from scratch, a new organization, one that could fight the enemy with stealth, sabotage, and subversion. He called it the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS. It would become the father of the modern CIA. But in those early days, it was an experiment, a chaotic mix of soldiers, scholars, journalists, and dreamers, and it needed a place to train, a place so secret that even the U.S. Army would not know what happened there. In the spring of 1942, the first recruits began to arrive at an unmarked camp hidden deep within the woods of Maryland. Officially, it was part of a national park. In reality, it was the OSS training base number 1, codenamed Area B, surrounded by barbed wire and armed guards. The base was disguised as a forestry school. Locals saw trucks come and go but never asked questions. Inside, a new kind of American warrior was being born. The men who came here were not ordinary soldiers. They were linguists, athletes, mountain climbers, chemists, and stage actors. Some came from Ivy League universities, others from the streets of Chicago or New York. Many had never fired a gun before. What mattered was their mind and their ability to adapt. They were taught that the battlefield of the future would not always have front lines. It would exist in the shadows. Training began at dawn. Physical drills through the forest, obstacle courses, river crossings, night marches, then came weapons. Each recruit learned to handle pistols, knives, grenades, and explosives, not for show but for survival. But physical skill was only the beginning. The heart of OSS training was deception. Agents learned how to disappear in plain sight, how to build false identities, forge documents, and lie convincingly under pressure. They studied foreign languages by candlelight and practiced accents until they could pass as locals. In small cabins scattered through the woods, instructors taught the art of silent killing. The techniques had come from Britain's Special Operations Executive, refined by a legendary close combat instructor named William Fairbairn, a veteran of the Shanghai Police. Fairbairn's methods were brutal and efficient. A strike to the throat, a twist of the wrist, a single move to end a fight in seconds. Recruits practiced until the motions became instinct. They also learned demolition, how to blow up bridges, trains, and power plants with small packets of plastic explosive. They learned how to set delayed fuses, how to leave no trace, and how to vanish into the countryside before dawn. Every skill was taught with one purpose: to send these men and women behind enemy lines alone, where capture meant torture or death. Elsewhere, another camp was taking shape, one even more secret than the first. Across the border, on the shores of Lake Ontario in Canada, stood Camp X. Officially, it did not exist. It was built by British intelligence, but soon became the joint training ground for the SOE and the OSS. Its instructors were veterans of Europe's secret war, saboteurs, linguists, and killers who had already fought the Nazis in occupied France and Norway. At Camp X, recruits learned the dark art of espionage. They practiced lockpicking, safe cracking, and radio operation. They memorized ciphers, learned how to code and decode under stress. They built miniature bombs disguised as pens and cigarette cases. They were taught how to vanish into a crowd or how to make a death look like an accident. Instructors were ruthless. A single mistake in training could mean expulsion. There were no second chances. Graduates left Camp X not as soldiers, but as ghosts. They carried no uniforms, no dog tags, no identity. If they were caught, Washington would deny they ever existed. Back in Washington, Donovan's new organization grew rapidly. By 1943, the OSS had thousands of agents operating around the world, in Europe, Africa, and Asia. Its training bases expanded too. One was hidden in the mountains of Virginia, another inside a private estate in Maryland. A desert camp in California trained men for infiltration into North Africa. Each base specialized. Some taught radio work, others focused on explosives or disguise. Together they formed the invisible backbone of the American war effort. For the first time in U.S. history, the country had a full-fledged intelligence and covert operations force, one that could fight not just with bullets but with information. Instructors at the camps were often scientists, psychologists, and veterans of the SOE. They studied human behavior, teaching recruits how to read body language, how to detect lies, how to interrogate without violence. Some training bordered on the bizarre. At one OSS facility, recruits were dropped in unfamiliar towns with only a few dollars and told to survive for a week without revealing who they were. Those who were caught failed. Those who adapted, who talked their way out, who bluffed convincingly, passed. In the dining hall, recruits were told to sit with strangers and start conversations. Every meal was a test. Could you blend in? Could you listen without giving yourself away? Donovan's instructors believed that espionage was not about gadgets or guns. It was about psychology, understanding people, manipulating them. It was a new kind of warfare, one fought in whispers, not gunfire. Women were part of it too. The OSS recruited hundreds of them, often overlooked by the regular military. They became couriers, analysts, and field agents. Some served in Europe disguised as secretaries or nurses. Others transmitted coded messages through hidden radios in occupied France. One of them, Virginia Hall, became legendary. An American spy who operated under the Gestapo's nose, organizing resistance fighters and sabotaging railways. She had lost a leg years before, but it never stopped her. Her courage earned her the nickname the Limping Lady. The OSS treated her as one of their finest. To Donovan, skill mattered more than rank or gender. As the war intensified, so did the pressure. By 1943, the Allies were preparing for invasions in Italy and France. Behind those operations would be thousands of unseen hands, OSS and SOE agents working together to weaken German defenses. The training camps shifted focus. Now they taught resistance coordination, how to arm local partisans, organize sabotage networks, and pass information to advancing Allied forces. Maps of Europe hung on every wall. Recruits memorized villages, rail lines, and drop zones. Night after night, they practiced parachute jumps over dark fields. They learned how to land silently, bury their chutes, and navigate by the stars. Every man carried a small kit, a pistol, a compass, a cyanide pill. The mission orders were memorized, then burned. At dawn, when the fog settled over the Maryland hills, the camps looked peaceful. Birdsong, pine trees, the hum of distant trucks. But inside the classrooms, the lessons were deadly serious. Instructors drilled one phrase into every recruit's mind. Never be predictable, never repeat a pattern, and never, ever be caught alive. It was not bravado. It was survival. For those who graduated, the next step was deployment. They would travel under false passports through neutral countries into enemy territory, sometimes alone, sometimes in pairs. From France to Burma, OSS agents became America's invisible army, blowing bridges, rescuing POWs, training guerrillas, and gathering intelligence that shaped the course of the war. But every operation traced its roots back to those secret bases, to the forests of Maryland, the lakes of Ontario, the deserts of California, where ordinary Americans learned to become something entirely new. By the summer of 1943, Donovan's vision had become reality. The OSS was fully operational, its network spanning continents. It reported directly to the Joint Chiefs of Staff and often to Roosevelt himself. To the outside world, it barely existed. Its name was never mentioned in newspapers. Its budget was hidden inside other departments. Even within the military, many officers distrusted it, calling Donovan's men amateurs or glamour spies. But in the field, results spoke louder than ridicule. OSS teams helped prepare the invasion of Sicily. They coordinated sabotage in France before D-Day. They trained guerrilla armies in China and Burma to fight the Japanese. Their intelligence saved thousands of lives. And behind it all stood the ghostly footprint of their training. The secret bases that had turned recruits into masters of deception. When the sun set over the Maryland hills, lights in the camp went out early. Guards walked the perimeter. Inside the barracks, recruits whispered quietly, polishing their weapons or reviewing code phrases. Some would soon be on planes to Europe. Others would vanish into Asia. None knew if they would return. But every one of them carried the same quiet conviction that the war would not only be won on beaches or in the skies, but in the dark places no one would ever see. They were the shadows behind victory. The war moved quickly. Every month new fronts opened, new crises emerged, and new demands landed on the desk of General William Donovan. But the one thing that never changed was secrecy. To the public, the Office of Strategic Services still did not exist. Its mail went through the War Department under false names. Its budgets were buried inside other accounts. Its officers wore no insignia, carried no standard orders, and reported only to Donovan and the President. And scattered across North America, hidden behind fences and false signs, the OSS built what insiders began calling the spy factories. Among the quiet hills of Maryland's Catoctin Mountain Park stood a cluster of wooden cabins and gravel roads. Locals knew it as a presidential retreat. Only a few knew that deep in those same woods, the OSS was training men for missions that officially did not exist. Recruits learned to move silently through forest terrain, to navigate at night without compass or map, and to improvise explosives from household chemicals. Every tree stump, every bridge, every farmhouse became a target in a lesson on sabotage. It was here that the OSS began blending science with strategy. Chemists taught agents how to create time pencils, tiny acid delay fuses that could detonate charges hours after being placed. Engineers designed miniature radios no larger than a book. Even the farmers nearby unknowingly supplied the school with practice targets. Tractors, wagons, fences, all replaced the next day as if nothing had happened. When training finished, the graduates disappeared. Some to North Africa, others to France. Some never heard from again. Their records were sealed, their names erased from unit lists. Farther north, the chill winds off Lake Ontario swept through another secret world. Camp X, built under British direction, became the finishing school for America's new intelligence force. Here, the line between soldier and spy disappeared. Instructors were veterans of sabotage missions in Norway and France, men with hollow eyes and quiet voices who had survived behind enemy lines. They taught the Americans everything: how to slit a sentry's throat, how to forge a passport, how to make an enemy talk without leaving a bruise. One classroom taught only black propaganda agents learned how to print fake German newspapers, how to imitate Nazi radio broadcasts, and how to spread rumors designed to break morale. Words could be deadlier than bullets. At the firing range, trainees used silenced pistols built by British gunsmiths, the famous well rod. Its soft cough could kill at 10 paces without alerting a guard. Students practiced until their movements were fluid, efficient, emotionless. Every morning began with a salute to a flag that didn't exist, just a plain field of blue. The instructors reminded them, from now on, you serve no nation. You serve the mission. Back in Washington, Donovan's staff created a branch few understood, the Schools and Training Division. Its motto was anything, anywhere, anytime. It included psychologists, costume designers, stage magicians, and movie prop experts from Hollywood. They built fake documents, invented cover stories, and even trained agents in stage acting to perfect their new identities. One theater in downtown Washington became a classroom for deception. Agents practiced walking like Parisians, smoking like Italians, and bargaining like North Africans. Every gesture was studied, every accent perfected. Behind a locked door in another building, tailors produced uniforms for every army in Europe, perfect replicas down to the last button. Instructors drilled agents in how to wear them convincingly and, if captured, how to explain them. The goal was simple: to make an American vanish into occupied Europe without a trace. Not every OSS recruit carried a gun. Some carried ideas. Donovan believed morale was a weapon. He created the Morale Operations Branch, the MO, devoted to psychological warfare. Their classrooms taught manipulation, rumor spreading, and propaganda design. Students learned to craft fake letters from German soldiers, describing hopeless battles or shortages at home. Others learned to write counterfeit leaflets that mimicked Nazi orders but encouraged desertion. They forged stamps, copied signatures, and filled the world with doubt. Instructors quoted ancient strategists: to defeat the enemy, make him defeat himself. One instructor, a soft-spoken advertising executive from New York, explained it this way: we sell ideas the way we once sold soap. Only now the customer is the German army. By late 1943, training was no longer theoretical. Every graduate would soon see combat, but not in uniform. Before deployment, each recruit underwent a final test called the House of Horrors. It was a mock interrogation chamber. Lights blazed, dogs barked, voices shouted in German. Agents were tied to chairs, threatened, deprived of sleep. If they broke, even once, they were pulled from the program. Those who stayed silent were congratulated and told only, "Now you're ready." Within weeks, they were shipped to North Africa, Italy, or Britain under false names, carrying briefcases filled with cash, code sheets, and invisible ink. The OSS also built laboratories, secret workshops hidden in Washington basements and farmhouses in Virginia. This network, codenamed Station S and Division 19, produced the gadgets of silent war, explosive coal lumps that could be slipped into locomotives, matchboxes containing miniature radios, cigarettes laced with poisons, even condoms coated with luminous paint so agents could signal aircraft in darkness. It was the birth of America's first real spy tech scientists. From Harvard and MIT worked beside soldiers and stage illusionists. The result was a strange alchemy of science and imagination, lethal and brilliant. Despite all the gadgets, the OSS knew that its greatest weapon was people. Instructors reminded recruits that their missions would succeed only if they could think, improvise, and charm their way out of trouble. A single misplaced word could mean death. So they learned restraint, patience, observation. They were told to memorize faces, street signs, smells, to remember how bread was baked in one town versus another. Details saved lives. Many instructors were refugees, men and women who had escaped Nazi-occupied Europe. They taught the Americans the subtle clues that separated a Berliner from a Bavarian, a Parisian from a Lyonnais. To the OSS, knowledge was camouflage. In 1944, the number of women in OSS operations grew sharply. Some served as analysts and codebreakers in Washington. Others went abroad. At training bases, they were held to the same standards as men. They learned small arms, self-defense, and cryptography. Many proved exceptional, calm under pressure, invisible in plain sight. They carried messages through enemy checkpoints disguised as clerks or couriers. A few parachuted into France to organize resistance cells. When asked why women were so effective, one instructor said simply, "Because the enemy underestimates them." Every OSS camp ended training with a grim ceremony. Graduates gathered before dawn, their gear packed, their new names memorized. Instructors handed each a small card bearing a single line, "Welcome to the most dangerous job in the world." They boarded transport planes under false manifests and flew east across the Atlantic. Most landed in Britain, where they entered final staging sites run jointly with the SOE. There they rehearsed missions built from intelligence gathered months earlier. Targets were factories, bridges, fuel depots, the arteries of the Axis war machine. The work was dangerous beyond measure, but its impact was profound. Every explosion that delayed a train, every coded message that revealed troop movements, every rumor that made an enemy commander hesitate, all traced back to those American camps hidden among the trees. Many of the instructors never spoke of their wartime service, but among those whose names became known were Colonel William Wild Bill Fairbairn, Master of Close Quarters Combat, Colonel Rex Applegate, who adapted Fairbairn's methods for the OSS Major H.L. Kirkpatrick, who designed the field training program, Dr. Stanley Lovell, the Professor Moriarty of Donovan's labs, inventor of the Gadgets and Poisons Division. Lovell once described his job as to provide Donovan with the tools of the devil. Yet he saw his inventions as necessary in a world that had gone mad. Each OSS camp operated independently, and even its staff rarely knew the full picture. Agents trained in Maryland had no idea what was happening in Canada or California. Compartmentalization was total. It protected them and the mission. If one camp were exposed, the rest would remain intact. Even after the war, many trainees never realized how large their organization truly was. It was only decades later, when documents were declassified, that historians discovered just how extensive the network had been. At its height, the OSS ran more than 30 training sites across North America. Some were tiny, others sprawling compounds with their own airfields. Together, they trained over 13,000 agents between 1942 and 1945. Not everyone in Washington approved of Donovan's private army. Traditional generals saw the OSS as reckless, a sideshow run by civilians and idealists. They distrusted its secrecy, its independence, its unconventional methods. But Roosevelt valued Donovan's results. Intelligence from OSS sources shaped strategic decisions across the globe. Reports from behind enemy lines warned of German troop movements before D-Day and Japanese plans in Burma. Slowly, grudgingly, the rest of the military began to respect the shadow warriors. In 1944, the greatest test came, the invasion of Normandy. For months before D-Day, OSS agents worked with the French resistance. They blew up railways, cut telephone lines, and spread disinformation to confuse German commanders. Many of those agents had once marched through the mud of Maryland's training camps, carrying wooden rifles and blank grenades. Now their lessons were real. Their sabotage delayed German reinforcements for hours, enough to change the course of the invasion. In Italy, OSS operatives guided partisans through the Apennine Mountains, ambushing convoys and mapping enemy gun positions. In Burma, the OSS Detachment 101 trained native Kachin tribesmen to fight the Japanese, one of the most successful guerrilla forces of the war. The camps that had begun as experiments now had living proof of success. Despite their anonymity, OSS agents shared a silent bond. They belonged to a fraternity of risk, secrecy, and purpose. At reunions after the war, when they were finally allowed to meet publicly, many said they missed the training more than the missions. It had been a crucible, a place where they learned not just how to fight, but how to think. The lessons of those hidden bases shaped an entire generation of American intelligence officers. When the CIA was founded in 1947, nearly all of its early leaders were OSS veterans, men and women forged in the camps Donovan built. By the end of 1944, the spy factories had done their work. Thousands of invisible soldiers were scattered across the world. The war's outcome was turning. But new challenges awaited, and new secrets, because victory in Europe was not the end of their mission. For many in the OSS, it was only the beginning. The camps had done their work. By 1944, hundreds of American agents had graduated from the OSS's hidden schools. Now, scattered across the globe, they fought a war that most Americans would never hear about. No front lines, no medals, only whispers, darkness, and coded messages. This was the Shadow War, and its soldiers trained in secrecy were finally unleashed. In Britain, OSS officers gathered inside small, windowless offices near Baker Street, sharing walls with their British counterparts in the Special Operations Executive. Their mission was simple in theory, impossible in practice: prepare the way for the invasion of Europe. They studied maps, supply routes, and German garrison strengths. But maps weren't enough. They needed eyes on the ground, men and women who could live among the enemy and survive. So OSS agents slipped into France by parachute or fishing boat. They carried false papers, forged in Maryland. They spoke fluent French, learned from native instructors at Camp X. And they carried radio sets no larger than a typewriter, hidden inside suitcases. Every night they sent short bursts of Morse code to London, reports of troop movements, train schedules, fuel depots. If a signal lasted too long, the Germans could triangulate its position, so each message had to be sent in under a minute. The rhythm of those clicks became the heartbeat of the resistance. In the weeks before D-Day, OSS agents worked with the French Maquis, arming and training them for the coming storm. They taught demolition tactics, how to derail trains, and how to ambush convoys with homemade explosives. In one operation near Lyon, an OSS team destroyed a key bridge hours before a German armored division tried to cross, delaying its reinforcements to Normandy. In another, OSS radio operators coordinated hundreds of simultaneous acts of sabotage, plunging rail networks into chaos. The Germans called it the Month of Fire. For the Allies, it was proof that the Shadow Army was real. One agent later wrote, "We had no uniforms, no glory. Only the satisfaction of knowing that every cut wire, every broken track, helped men we would never meet." South of the Alps, the OSS waged another kind of war. In 1943, as Italy surrendered and German forces moved in, American agents entered the chaos. They linked up with Italian partisans, factory workers, students, priests, anyone willing to resist. Hidden in the mountains, they coordinated supply drops, gathered intelligence on German troop positions, and sabotaged communication lines. The missions were perilous. Agents operated with no backup. Capture meant torture by the Gestapo or execution by firing squad. In one mission, OSS officers infiltrated Milan disguised as Swiss businessmen. They bribed railway officials, stole maps, and passed coded notes through a flower shop. Their information helped the Allies plan bombing raids that crippled northern Italy's transport network. Each success carried a price: fear, exhaustion, isolation. But it worked. By 1944, German control over Italy was breaking, and the OSS was among those who had weakened it. Farther east, in the rugged mountains of Yugoslavia and Greece, OSS agents entered a world of shifting loyalties. The region was a maze of resistance movements: royalists, communists, and bandits, all fighting the Germans and sometimes each other. American teams parachuted into this chaos, tasked with building alliances and funneling supplies. They lived in caves, hunted by patrols, surviving on meager rations. They carried gold coins for bribes, morphine for the wounded, and radios to call for airdrops. One OSS officer described the experience simply: "We were diplomats by day, soldiers by night, and ghosts by morning." It was dangerous work, but it kept the Balkans aflame, forcing Germany to divert troops that might have fought elsewhere. Half a world away, another secret war was unfolding. In the dense jungles of Burma, the OSS created Detachment 101, its most successful and unconventional unit. Formed in 1942, it operated behind Japanese lines, training and leading native Kachin tribesmen in guerrilla warfare. Its officers lived rough, sleeping in bamboo huts, eating local food, and fighting in the same muddy boots for months. They built airstrips out of jungle clearings, blew up bridges, ambushed convoys, and rescued downed Allied pilots. They gathered intelligence on Japanese troop movements for General Stilwell's campaign into northern Burma. At its peak, Detachment 101 had nearly 10,000 Kachin fighters under its command. Their attacks destroyed more than 200 bridges, 50,000 tons of enemy supplies, and killed over 5,000 Japanese soldiers, at the cost of just 200 Americans. Their motto was simple: "We never fight fair." To the OSS, success wasn't measured in battles won, but in chaos created. In China, OSS officers worked with Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist forces and with the Chinese underground in occupied territories. Their job was intelligence, tracking Japanese troop movements and aiding American airmen shot down over enemy territory. Operating under the cover of weather bureaus or Red Cross units, Agents built vast spy networks across southern China. They also clashed with the Chinese communists, who distrusted American presence. Espionage there wasn't only against Japan, it was also a rehearsal for the Cold War to come. For all their success, many OSS operatives never returned. Some were captured by the Gestapo. Others disappeared behind enemy lines without a trace. Records list hundreds simply as missing in action. In France, one radio operator was betrayed by a double agent. He refused to reveal codes even under torture, dying in a Gestapo prison. In the Pacific, another was executed after weeks of interrogation. His last message, scribbled on paper and smuggled out by a fellow prisoner, read, "Tell them it was worth it." They were anonymous in life and often nameless in death. Even their families didn't know what they had done until decades later. In early 1945, with Germany collapsing, OSS intelligence teams followed behind Allied lines, securing documents, technology, and scientists before the Soviets could reach them. It was called Operation Alsos. They captured samples of uranium ore, V-2 rocket plans, and physicists tied to Hitler's atomic program. These findings shaped the post-war world and led directly to Operation Paperclip, which brought German scientists to America after the war. For many OSS veterans, this was the beginning of a new kind of conflict, one fought not against fascism, but against communism. By mid-1945, as the war ended, the OSS stood at a crossroads. It had proven its worth. Yet many in Washington wanted it gone. Traditional military leaders still viewed it as reckless. The FBI resented its foreign and domestic reach. When President Roosevelt died in April 1945, Donovan lost his greatest supporter. His successor, Harry Truman, distrusted the OSS. By September, the order came. The Office of Strategic Services would be dissolved. Its research branch went to the Department of State. Its operational branch was absorbed by the War Department as the Strategic Services Unit, a shadow of its former self. For many open source software veterans, it was a bitter moment. After years of silent service, their organization vanished overnight. But history was not done with them yet. 2 years later, in 1947, President Truman signed the National Security Act. From its pages emerged a new agency, the Central Intelligence Agency. Many of its founders were OSS men. They brought with them the lessons of Donovan's secret bases, independence, flexibility, and a belief that intelligence could decide wars before armies did. The CIA's early culture was built on OSS tradition: small teams, bold missions, and a willingness to operate where others would not. It was the OSS reborn with new technology, new enemies, and a permanent place in the American government. In Europe, former OSS officers helped rebuild post-war Germany, running covert operations to track Soviet spies and smuggle people across new borders. In Asia, veterans of Detachment 101 worked in the early CIA's efforts in Korea, Tibet, and Indochina. The skills learned in Maryland and Camp X lived on, passed quietly from one generation of agents to the next. Their creed remained unchanged. Nothing is impossible. Nothing is certain. Nothing is written. For decades after the war, OSS veterans were forbidden to talk about their missions. Many went back to ordinary lives. Professors, businessmen, engineers. They carried memories that even their families never heard. It wasn't until the 1970s, when files were declassified, that the public learned what these men and women had done. The training camps that had once been whispers in the woods were now historic landmarks. The OSS, once dismissed as amateurs, were recognized as the pioneers of American intelligence. Even as victory neared, OSS operations didn't stop. In May 1945, OSS agents entered German cities alongside advancing Allied troops. Their orders were to seize Nazi archives, capture scientists, and prevent mass destruction of evidence. In Austria, they uncovered secret communications networks and hidden caches of gold. In Czechoslovakia, they rescued resistance leaders hunted by the Gestapo. And in the Pacific, OSS teams prepared for the invasion of Japan, a plan canceled only by the atomic bomb. Had the invasion gone forward, thousands of OSS-trained agents would have landed behind Japanese lines to guide the assault. It would have been the largest covert operation in U.S. history. When the OSS closed, Donovan left quietly. He returned to law, declining public office. But he never stopped believing in what his organization had started. He once wrote, "We built an army of the unknown who fought without recognition and without reward. They were America's silent heroes." In 1959, when the CIA dedicated its new headquarters, a single statue was placed in the lobby. It was of William J. Donovan, the man who had created America's first secret army. The inscription read, "Father of Central Intelligence." For all its achievements, the OSS lived with a heavy burden. Secrecy protected it, but it also erased it. For years, its veterans watched others celebrated while their own deeds stayed buried in classified files. But perhaps that was fitting. They had never fought for fame, only for victory, and for the idea that knowledge itself was a weapon. They were the invisible architects of modern intelligence, the bridge between the old world of armies and the new world of information. The OSS had been born in desperation, tested in secrecy, and dissolved in triumph. But its spirit endured. Every modern covert operation, every field agent, every mission carried a trace of that legacy. The lessons first taught in those hidden camps beneath the trees. The war in the shadows had ended, but the shadows themselves would never fade. The guns of World War II finally fell silent, but for the men and women who had served in the OSS, silence was nothing new. They had lived in it, they had worked in it, and when peace returned, they simply faded back into it, carrying with them the memories of a war fought in shadows. The OSS no longer existed. Its files were sealed, its missions erased from official records, yet its spirit and its methods refused to die, because the world it had helped to win was not the same world that now emerged. A new enemy was already rising, invisible, ideological, and global. The Cold War had begun. In Washington, the transition was quiet. The OSS had been dissolved in name, but its people remained. Many were transferred into a small unit inside the War Department, blandly titled the Strategic Services Unit. Its job was to preserve the intelligence networks and contacts built during the war. Among those networks were spies still active in Eastern Europe, double agents inside Germany, and contacts in the Far East. They could not simply be abandoned. 2 years later, in 1947, President Harry Truman signed the National Security Act. It created a new structure, one that would centralize military and civilian intelligence for the first time. Its centerpiece was the Central Intelligence Agency. From the ashes of the OSS, a new organization was born. It would inherit its files, its techniques, and its philosophy. That information, when used wisely, was more powerful than any weapon. And in its early days, the CIA looked a great deal like the OSS reborn. Many of the CIA's first leaders were OSS veterans. They had trained in the Maryland Hills, parachuted into France, and led guerrillas in Burma. Now they faced a different kind of battlefield, one of diplomacy, propaganda, and covert operations. They applied what they had learned in the war. Operate in small, flexible teams. rely on local allies, gather intelligence firsthand, and never underestimate the power of persuasion. The techniques once used against Hitler and Tojo were now used against Stalin and Mao. Covert propaganda units echoed the OSS's Morale Operations Branch. Parachute drops of leaflets and radios over Eastern Europe were the heirs of OSS black propaganda. Psychological warfare, once an experiment and became policy. Through OSS's handbooks, once stamped top secret, became the manuals of the Cold War. Even Camp X, the Canadian base where Americans had learned the arts of sabotage, found its place in the New World. After the war, it became part of the communication network linking the US and Britain, a forerunner to modern electronic intelligence sharing. Its secret signal station, codenamed Hydra, transmitted encrypted traffic between Washington and London. The partnership between the OSS and the British SOE evolved into the special relationship that still defines Western intelligence today. Out of those wartime friendships grew alliances, MI6, the CIA, and the signals agencies that form the backbone of the Five Eyes network. All of it traced back to the dark waters of Lake Ontario and the cabins where agents once learned to kill silently. The OSS left behind more than just agencies and files. It left behind an idea that knowledge itself was a form of power. When veterans returned home, they carried that mindset into civilian life. They became professors, diplomats, journalists, and inventors. Their wartime experiences reshaped industries. Some helped build America's early computer systems, inspired by wartime code breaking. Others went into foreign service, shaping U.S. diplomacy with lessons learned from clandestine negotiation. The OSS had trained them not only to survive, but to think differently, to adapt, improvise, and analyze. Those traits quietly infused American culture in the decades that followed. By the 1950s, most of the old OSS camps were gone. The fences had been torn down, the barracks dismantled, the signs removed, the forests reclaimed their ground. Camp X in Ontario closed in 1946. Area B in Maryland was absorbed into Camp David, the presidential retreat. The training ground in Virginia became a state park. Nothing remained, except for rumors. Hikers sometimes stumbled on rusted barbed wire or concrete slabs in the woods. Local legends spoke of ghost camps, where men once trained for secret wars. In truth, the ghosts were real, not supernatural, but historical. Thousands of men and women had passed through those woods, carrying skills that would change the world. For decades, the OSS remained a secret even to those it had served. Its veterans received no campaign ribbons, no official acknowledgement. Only in the 1990s did historians begin to uncover its full story. Then, in 2016, 70 years after its dissolution, the United States Congress awarded the Congressional Gold Medal to the OSS, the nation's highest civilian honor. The citation read, "For their pioneering achievements and the immeasurable contributions of the Office of Strategic Services to the Allied victory in World War II." World War II and the creation of the modern intelligence community. At the ceremony, aging veterans, men and women in their 90s, stood quietly as the medal was unveiled. Few spoke. They had spent a lifetime keeping secrets. Even now, they preferred silence. By then, Wild Bill Donovan had long since passed away. He died in 1959 at the age of 76, never having written his own memoir. He left behind only one instruction for his tombstone. "At all times and in all places, I served my country." Those words summed up the man and the organization he built. Donovan believed that victory required imagination. He had once told his recruits, "We must learn to think as the enemy thinks, to fight as he fights, to understand his mind before we strike. That belief became the foundation of American intelligence strategy, a doctrine that endures to this day. Yet the OSS's legacy was not without pain. Its secrecy came with isolation. Many agents carry trauma long after the war ended. Nightmares of interrogation rooms, lost comrades, and narrow escapes haunted them for decades. Few sought recognition. Most kept their silence, even from family. To speak openly of what they had done felt like betrayal, not of country, but of comrades who never came home. In quiet moments, some returned to the woods where they had trained. They stood where the barracks once were, where the firing range lay overgrown with grass. They said nothing, just listened to the wind through the trees and remembered. The world Donovan helped create would soon evolve beyond imagination. The Cold War gave rise to satellites, nuclear weapons, and global surveillance, but its foundations, the training, the mindset, the secrecy, all came from those wartime roots. The OSS taught America that wars are not only fought on battlefields, they are fought in laboratories, in propaganda offices, and in the hearts of ordinary people. It proved that victory depends not only on strength, but on knowledge, on understanding what cannot be seen. That lesson became the philosophy of every intelligence service since. In museums today, a few remnants of the OSS remain: a silenced pistol, a coded notebook, a radio transmitter in a suitcase. Visitors walk past without knowing that these objects once carried the weight of life and death. They belonged to men and women who had no uniforms, no parades, and no certainty of survival. Their victories were measured not in headlines, but in lives saved, soldiers guided to safety, convoys diverted, invasions made possible. They were the invisible scaffolding of Allied success, and yet they asked for nothing in return. The OSS story is not just about spies and assassins. It is about transformation of a nation and of an idea. When the war began, America had no intelligence agency. When it ended, it had created one of the most sophisticated espionage networks in history. It had learned that in the modern world, information is power and secrecy is survival. From the dark classrooms of Maryland and the icy shores of Canada grew an entire new way of thinking, one that continues to shape the modern age of intelligence technology and global politics. Today, the world those agents built has changed beyond recognition. Satellites watch from orbit. Cyber networks replace radios. Drones follow where spies once crept through shadows. But the principles remain: adapt, observe, endure. In every CIA training manual, in every modern intelligence course, echoes of Donovan's creed remain. The art of disguise, the craft of persuasion, the courage to act alone, all born from the secret camps of the OSS. Those camps no longer exist on any map, but their spirit still lives in the men and women who walk quietly into danger, serving without glory, unseen and unnamed. When the forests grow silent at night and the wind moves through the pines of Maryland, perhaps the ghosts of those early agents still linger, watchful, patient, waiting for orders that will never come again. Because once, long ago, in the heart of a world at war, America built a hidden army. They fought without uniform, without recognition, and without regret. And though history calls them spies, they were something greater, the first guardians of a new kind of warfare, the pioneers of a world where knowledge was the deadliest weapon of all.